A quiet hum echoed through the air inside a sparkling boutique in the heart of Willowbrook, New Hampshire. The polished glass cabinets reflected soft light, displaying a range of exquisite necklaces, bracelets, and sparkling gemstones. Every piece seemed like it could hold a memory, a little treasure waiting to find its perfect owner. In walked Margaret, adjusting her well-worn handbag over her arm. At 75, her silvery hair was neatly tucked under a pale scarf, and her eyes glimmered with a warm, welcoming smile as she scanned the room. She was familiar with this shop. Her daughter Emily had worked tirelessly to build it into the town's most respected jewelers. Each time Margaret visited, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride for the business Emily had created from nothing. Today, Margaret had a little surprise for her daughter. It was a simple tradition. Every month, she would pop into the store unannounced, bringing a warm meal from Emily's favorite cafe. She loved seeing her daughter interact with customers, to watch her in her element. But today, Emily was away. The clerk at the counter informed Margaret that Emily was meeting with a new supplier and would return soon. Margaret wasn't bothered. She enjoyed her time in the store, quietly browsing through the beautiful pieces. Her fingers gently grazed the edges of the display cases, feeling the comfort of a place she'd come to know well over the years. Her eyes lingered on a pair of sapphire earrings, their deep blue sparkle reminding her of a pair she had owned long ago, before life circumstances had forced her to part with them. For a moment, she found herself lost in the past. She leaned a little closer, captivated by the familiar luster. In a soft motion, her hand brushed against the edge of the case, and the earrings wobbled slightly. Before she could stop it, one fell to the ground with a faint metallic sound. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She bent down slowly to retrieve it, feeling a slight tinge of embarrassment even though no one had seemed to notice. As she reached for the earring, the unmistakable click of high heels echoed behind her. Looking up, Margaret saw a tall woman standing over her, her sharp features giving little away. The woman's eyes scanned Margaret coldly, and Margaret realized that she didn't recognize her. The stranger was new to the boutique. Her face lacked the warmth that the regular staff often displayed, and a chill seemed to emanate from her. Margaret tried to brush it off as she stood, still holding the earring carefully. "I'm sorry, dear. I just wanted a closer look," she began, smiling awkwardly. "This reminds me of a pair I once—" Before she could finish, the woman's voice cut through the air, sharp and unfriendly. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. Taken aback, Margaret held up the earring gently. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just knocked it by accident," she explained, her voice calm and steady. "Accident?" The woman's tone was drenched in sarcasm. "Or were you trying to pocket it?" Her eyes narrowed further, as if accusing Margaret of something far worse than a simple mistake. Margaret's stomach twisted. "What? No, I would never." But the woman wasn't listening. Her gaze swept over Margaret, taking in her modest coat and well-worn bag with a silent judgment. "People like you don't belong in places like this," she hissed, her words low and dripping with disdain. Margaret recoiled, holding the earring out, her voice trembling. "There's been a misunderstanding." Without warning, the woman snatched the earring from her hand, her fingers cold and forceful. "Enough of your excuses," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Her world seemed to tilt as her heart raced. "The police? This is crazy. I didn't do anything wrong." Ignoring her, the woman began speaking into the phone. "Yes, I need officers at Bella's Gems. There's a woman here trying to steal an earring. She's still on the premises, and I've detained her." Margaret could hardly comprehend what was happening. She stumbled back, clutching her handbag as if it might anchor her to reality. Moments later, the door swung open, and the heavy steps of two officers echoed through the room. Both men were tall, their uniforms immaculate, their faces stern. They walked directly toward the woman, who wasted no time in pointing at Margaret and launching into her dramatic retelling of events. "This woman," the woman said, her fingers shaking as she pointed, "was caught trying to steal. I had to stop her before she made off with the goods." Margaret's hands shook as she tried to speak. "I wasn't stealing anything," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm Emily's mother. Please, this is a mistake." The officers exchanged a brief look, but their focus remained on the woman. One officer approached Margaret, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, step forward," he commanded. Margaret's legs felt like they might give way. "Please, I didn't do anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But before she could continue, the officer grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her to the side. She stumbled, her knees buckling as the cold metal of handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "Stop! What are you doing?" Margaret cried, panic rising in her chest. The pressure of the cuffs was suffocating. She could hardly believe what was happening. How had it come to this? The officers ignored her as they began leading her toward the door. Margaret's mind spun in a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. She was being treated like a criminal in her daughter's own shop. It made no sense. Then, from across the room, a voice rang out, sharp and full of authority. "What the hell is going on here?" The officers stopped in their tracks, and Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She turned her head to see Emily, standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of shock and fury. Emily's eyes scanned the scene quickly, taking in the sight of her mother in handcuffs and the officer's firm grip on her arms. Without hesitation, Emily marched forward, her voice a low growl of command. "Take those off her," she ordered, her presence demanding attention. The officer hesitated, clearing his throat. "We're responding to a theft complaint, ma'am." "Take them off." Emily's tone was icy, her eyes flashing with barely contained rage. She turned to Margaret, her expression softening. "Are you all right, Mom?" Margaret nodded weakly, still in shock, her voice a fragile whisper. "I didn't do anything, Emily. I just dropped the earring." Turning to the saleswoman, Emily's gaze hardened. "Miss Taylor, care to explain why you thought calling the police on my mother was a good idea?" Miss Taylor faltered, clearly flustered. I didn't know she was your mother. I thought you thought." Emily's voice rose, a mix of disbelief and anger. "What made you think that my mother would steal from this store?" "I didn't mean—" Miss Taylor stammered, her confidence quickly evaporating. "I was just doing what I thought was best." Emily's face twisted in disgust. "Doing what was best? You've humiliated my mother and insulted me, my business, and everything we've built." She gestured toward Margaret, still shaking, her eyes hardening. "Look at her. Do you honestly think she looks like a thief?" Miss Taylor opened her mouth, but no words came out. Emily stood next to her mother, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. Margaret felt a wave of relief flood through her. The officers slowly unclipped the cuffs, though neither offered an apology. The tension in the room had shifted. Emily was there, and that made everything feel right again. As Margaret stood in the now-quiet boutique, the weight of the situation began to lift, but the sting of what had just transpired remained. Emily's presence had been her anchor, a reminder that in the face of injustice, there was still hope. The tension that had filled the store seemed to melt away as the officers slowly backed toward the door, offering no more words, but leaving behind an undeniable sense of discomfort at their earlier actions. The shop, which had always been a place of warmth and comfort, now felt different. The gleaming display cases, the soft hum of the lighting, the elegant pieces that once felt welcoming now seemed cold and distant. The very atmosphere that had once radiated with a sense of community now felt tainted by the cruelty of one woman's prejudice. Margaret could hardly believe how quickly everything had spiraled out of control, how a simple accident had escalated into such a terrifying ordeal. As the officers left, Emily turned to Margaret, her eyes still burning with fury. "I don't know what to say, Mom," she said quietly. "This shouldn't have happened to you." Margaret smiled, her heart full of gratitude and pride. "It's not your fault, darling. You've built something beautiful here. Don't let one person's actions define it." With a sigh, Emily nodded, her anger now tempered with a desire to ensure that something like this would never happen again. "I'm going to make sure it doesn't. No one will ever treat my family like that again. In the end, It wasn't the injustice they had faced that mattered most, but the love that had always been at the heart of Emily's business. They had weathered the storm together, stronger than ever, and that was something no one could take away. As they stood in the boutique, a quiet sense of resolve began to settle over them. The ordeal had shaken Margaret, but Emily's fierce determination had reminded her that strength and love could overcome even the harshest of trials. Emily wrapped her arm around her mother, guiding her toward the front door, her voice soft but steady. "Let's get some fresh air, Mom. I'll make sure everything's taken care of here." Margaret nodded, grateful for the support. As they stepped outside, the crisp air of Willowbrook seemed to offer a fresh start, a reminder that no matter the challenges, family would always be the strongest anchor. Together, they would move forward, ensuring that their shared dream would continue to shine, unscathed by the bitterness of one person's misguided actions. And in that moment, Margaret realized that what had happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a turning point, a reaffirmation of everything that truly mattered.